welcome everybody who's tuning in for this webinar. We're doing an on-time shipping roundtable or an executive planning roundtable. And so Xometry, we're really thankful for all of our partners that are a part of our network. When I do new partner onboarding calls, one of the things I always say is we are constantly looking for ways for our partners to succeed, for our partner success, because we win when you all win. That is genuinely true. So we are constantly looking for ways for y'all to succeed. And one of the ways that we do that is to, talk with partners and identify common pain points that everyone's having in the network and see ways that we can kind of step in, speak to those, help them solve those problems. And one of the things that we've noticed among our partners is that they're having trouble with their OTS scores. Their on-time shipping scores, if any of you all are curious about that. We know that there's a million different things that can go wrong during the life of a job. A million different things can come up during the life of this job. And so what we're going to do is we're going to broaden this on-time shipping issue. We're going to broaden it to a larger conversation of, once I accept this job on this job board, how do I plan the production of this part in a way that it can get across the finish line by the time, by the date that it is requested? And the way that we're approaching this is we're going to have a roundtable conversation. What we did was we found experts. We scoured the Xometry network for experts in their various fields to kind of sit in, have a conversation, offer up their unique perspective from their area of expertise, and just have an open conversation and let you all be a fly on the wall for this conversation. If you all have any, please be involved in the chat. If you have any questions during these conversations, please feel free to ask them. Casey's going to be monitoring the chat so that they can get heard. One quick housekeeping note: this is for our panel, but this is also for the people tuning in. We want the spirit of this conversation to be educational. So that means we understand that, like, in these million different ways a job can go wrong, oftentimes it can be because of somebody else or because of another company. We want to refrain from those kind of conversations. We want to refrain from naming specific people. We want to keep Xometry not just like a partner of networks, but the Xometry community. And so we're going to keep the spirit of this conversation purely educational. With that in mind, I'll go ahead and kick off introducing the panelists. Y'all have heard enough from me. So that is me. I'm the moderator of this conversation. I also do a lot of stuff with the community. But we'll kick it off to Bobby. Bobby, we want to know what your name is, your company, and what landed you on this panel. What area of expertise landed you on this panel?
Certainly. Well, appreciate you all hosting this and inviting me to be on. And thanks for everybody that's joined us. My name is Bobby Riley. I am the materials category manager for Xometry Supplies. Guess the reason I'm here is that material sourcing is often part of the potential for things to go wrong. And I work with our supplies team here at Xometry in sourcing materials. So contributed in that way. Been with Xometry for about 6 years. So thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, Bobby. Mark, what about you? Let's go to you next.
So I've been actually in business along with my brother on our own since 2014, and we started out with the one CNC machine, and we grew to having 5 vertical machining centers and 2 turning centers right now. And I've been with Xometry, gosh, I think I've been with Xometry like about a year and a half or something like that. Don't remember exactly, but really last year I started picking up more and more work with Xometry, and I'm planning on continuing that and maybe even increasing.
All right. Well, we're thankful for you joining us for this conversation. Let's go over to Jeff. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, this is Jeff Shabbat. I work with JMD Industries. I've been with JMD for about 5 years. My background is mostly engineering and design. So I'm heavily involved in continual improvement for JMD and all the new technology and the latest fads that we can introduce and try to basically make everything as efficient as possible. So I've been working with Xometry probably for about 3 years. I think we're one of the first companies to team up with Xometry on the finishing network, and we've been excited to work with you guys, and we can't wait to see what comes of the future.
An OG finisher. Well, we thank you for joining us for this conversation, Jeff. Amy, let's go over to you.
Good afternoon. It is so nice to see so many partners on here that I have spoken to and work with on a regular basis. My name is Amy Honeycutt. I am the partner coaching specialist with Xometry. And what that basically means is I actually work with partners who might be struggling with OTS or quality, or just kind of getting the hang of the Xometry learning curve sometimes with new partners. I've been with Xometry for just under a year, but I also have a lot of experience in production planning. So hopefully I can bring some of that to the table today as well.
All right, and I think that just leaves Chris. Thank you, Amy, for joining us for this conversation. I'm just as thankful for you, sorry, as the others. But Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Carrick. Chris Jones. I'm the quality manager for Xometry Supplies. I've been here 3 years. Started out as the warehouse manager when we had a distribution center in Lexington, and then moved forward to quality manager, vendor quality, basically the problem guy. So that's where my expertise comes from. I deal with when things go wrong. I'm the guy everybody turns to in our division. So hoping I can provide some insight and some relief in this conversation.
Wonderful. It is good to be wanted, the guy that people turn to when things go wrong. I was actually going to say the reason you were invited is because you have the best hair and it needs to be shown off. So
Bless you, Carrick.
It's really fortunate that you also have an area of expertise. I was just mainly going for the hair. But this is our panel, and we're going to try to make this as interesting as a conversation as we can for you all. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and go to our first question. So why do you think on-time delivery is important, and what impact does it have on your relationships with your customers? Let's talk to Mark first.
So I think anybody who's been in the industry for a little while knows how crucial it is to be on time. I mean, it not only creates the healthy relationship between the supplier and the customer, but also it allows the customer to plan with their customers. Oftentimes we're dealing with tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. So it is important for everybody to be on time and be a reliable source. And not to mention that being a supplier who's 90% on time, because I don't think anybody can be 100% on time. It puts you in a good position with whatever the customer you're dealing with. I mean, it not only, I don't want to say that gives you a little bit of the leverage, but it certainly puts you in a position where you have a good standing to negotiate a variety of things like extended lead times or increasing in prices or whatever have you.
Mark, what just out of curiosity, what industries are you all serving primarily out of your shop?
We have done a little bit of automotive in the past. We've done some consumer electronics. We've done tooling, and initially when I started, I was actually doing a lot of welding fixtures. So it was a lot of onesies and twosies, and not only fabricating, but I was also designing welding fixtures and the sheet metal forming dies. I'm actually coming from the sheet metal background when we did a lot of automotive prototypes that required custom tooling, and that tooling, it was called soft tooling, had to be done very quickly and had to be designed from the ground up, and that's basically what I came up with and started doing it on my own.
So one of the things that you mentioned as part of this relationship with your customers is it has to do a lot with reliability, because there's multiple steps after you that need to happen as well. Can you kind of speak to maybe a lot of people have their task in mind, and that's what they think about. Can you maybe speak to that larger picture of, oh, this is part of a bigger process. If one thing gets thrown off,
Yeah,
chain.
yeah, you know, it's hard to argue with somebody if you're always late, or if you're most of the time late. You know, they basically look at you, oh, okay, well, that's another excuse. And yeah, when it comes to the jobs where these type of jobs actually come across, when there is needs to be done quickly, or there's a crunch time, or there is a situation that needs to be dealt with, you are actually a guide to go, and that opens up additional doors and brings in additional opportunities. And you oftentimes you actually the first one that they turn to, and they look at you as the expert, and they treat you more like the partner, not like a vendor.
Mm. So Jeff, let's go over to you. I want to hear your thoughts on this as a finisher, as a post-production service. You're oftentimes that next step that can get thrown off if people are not meeting their OTS score. So what are your thoughts? Why don't you weigh in on this?
Yeah, Mark just made a good point that we always try to be a partner, right? Not just the next step in the process. So for us, the credibility that being on time gives you is everything, especially if you're dealing with prototyping and rapid production, right? So sometimes these parts can be needed for very important things you don't know. You know, it could be in a rocket, it could be in a plane. So being on time is everything. You know, we like to think that we deal in hours here, not days. Almost everything we do is very, very fast turns. So I think it's important to have a reliable source for your finishing. That way, your planning actually works, right? If you've planned for some finishing, some extra steps in your process, and it's on time every time, then you can start to build, you can start to plan, you can start to set goals. When your finisher is unreliable, or any third party is unreliable, you start to lose confidence, right? And probably more reluctant to want to place an order. So for us, it's everything. We've piggybacked on the lifestyle of most of the people in our area, our prototype shops, very, very quick turn. So that's kind of our bread and butter now. We've built a business plan on being able to react very quickly. And that's how we stick to our on-time delivery.
So you brought up something that's a perfect segue into our next question, which is, if you had to pick, you were speaking on planning, and you're speaking on how being able to react quickly to things. I would love to hear from everybody on the panel, actually, who's actually a panelist. Casey, don't worry. If you had to pick one thing that was most critical or most important to this planning process, what would you say it would have to be? The thing that's going to make you be able to pivot, be able to be flexible in case things come up. So as you're planning this job, what is the most important thing in your all's mind? And Jeff, since you were just speaking on that, we'll keep it with you, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So for us, the important piece of planning is ensuring that all the information is there up front. For finishers, we're typically working off of notes, off of a print, right? It's not necessarily baked into a 3D file or anything. So ensuring that the information is present, that it's accurate, and that, for instance, if there's customer specs being called out, that let's try to get those ahead of time. That way we're not wasting days going back and forth on stuff like that. So try to just make sure that the information you're giving your finisher is the most complete and most accurate upfront.
That's a great little nugget right there. Mark, let's what would you say? What would you say if you pick one thing, boil it down to one thing, what would it be?
Just going back to what Jeff said, I can echo that because I'm literally just working on 2 jobs for Xometry that I didn't have the specs in time for laser marking, but we overcame that, and I'm expecting to ship the job on time. But for me, planning starts before I actually accept the job. I mean, when I'm looking at the job board and I'm looking at the opportunities as they show up, first thing that I'm looking at if it's something that I can handle. And to be completely honest with you, because I did have 2 mishaps with the outside finishers in the past, those jobs are typically being dismissed by me right off the bat. Basically, I know what I can handle. I know what I can do. And I'm not sticking my neck out for something that I know will cause me grief. Although I have to say that lately I have seen some more attractive lead times on the jobs that require outside finishes. And I was actually about to accept a couple of the jobs, but I am, unfortunately, I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks, so I passed those on. But
I mean, Mark, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, sir. But I mean, that's something that I see with, the shops that we deal with and the attempting to source material. I think it's a lot of it is being realistic with yourself, understanding your current capabilities and what you have the capacity to be able to complete, especially on anything that's the quicker lead times. If you don't have material on your floor, oftentimes you're behind the 8 ball before you even get started, right? So, I think that, if I were to say one thing and some advice I would give to, to particular shops is, just trying to eliminate as many variables that are out there as possible by planning ahead for yourself. If that's bringing certain types of stocks types that you feel comfortable with machining into your facility and just holding some material so that you're able to take on some jobs with a potential quicker lead time. I guess those variables and just trying to eliminate them. And what you said about you're doing the planning before you even hit accept. Oftentimes, I think that's something that that shops might not do. Is they accept it because on the surface it looks very achievable, but once they dive into it and looking to potentially source material, get the finisher lined up if the finishing is required. Heaven forbid, if you have a machine go down or something like that, there's so many variables that are there, and you have to have the contingency sort of in place beforehand. So, Mark, I appreciate that you do some of that planning before you just hit accept, because it on the surface looks like something that you can handle within a time frame. If you dig into it a little bit more, make a little bit more informed decision. That's awesome.
Yeah, and there are some jobs that you will look at it, and you can sometimes you just don't see the tree past the forest, but you click on a job and later on it turns out that there's an issue with the tooling and stuff like that. But all those variables, like I mentioned before, know your weaknesses, know your strength, and just go with that. And I'm being in the Chicago area. I actually have this. I'm lucky that that we have a good base of the material suppliers and tooling suppliers in the area. I mean, oftentimes I honestly probably like 90% of the time I'm using a McMaster. I mean, my cutoff hour is like maybe 10 o'clock in the morning. So if I order material in the morning, I'll have it the same day, literally.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have other suppliers out of state as well, especially for plastics. But once again, know your strength, know your weaknesses, and just keep away from trouble. If you know that something gives you trouble, stay away from it.
Yeah, Mark, you said a couple of really interesting things right there. That one of them is actually a great opportunity to segue to the next question. So talking about partners who decline work because they know it's multiple steps. You said sometimes partners or manufacturers don't see the tree for the forest. And the other thing that you were saying was like, know your capabilities, know what you're capable of. So do I know enough about this process that is going to be happening afterwards? Goodness gracious. Do I know enough about this process that's happening next to actually take this job and be informed on it? And do I have those kind of relationships in place to make it happen? So quickly, we'll acknowledge the complexity of a multi-step job, one that requires a post-production process. What kind of advice might you give partners who want to take jobs that have, say, finishing or some other type of post-production work required, but they're hesitant too? What kind of advice would you give them? And then Jeff, being a finisher, what kind of advice would you give as well after him?
Well, I know that the jobs that I was having an issue with, one of them was black anodize on the aluminum, and pretty much anybody in the area that I called was had a 2-week lead time on the black anodize. I found a supplier that I haven't done business with, and they actually told me 1 week, and it later on turns out that it was 2 weeks. After a week, I called them; they haven't even touched the parts yet. But finding the base of the suppliers or vendors and knowing the lead times ahead of time. I mean, I know that clear anodize is actually a lot easier for me to outsource with a better lead time. I know that zinc plating, whether it's clear or yellow zinc, those are typically no problem. Passivating. So these type of things that I know that we normally do on daily basis, not so much daily basis, but we do quite frequently. Those are easy for me to handle. However, there are always hiccups, you know, and when you're dealing with the job that has a 5-day lead time, it's you know, it's kind of hard because all it takes is just one slip up. I mean, and it's hard to actually ask somebody, any supplier or vendor, to you know, bypass everybody else and do your job, you know, on a double because you have a short lead time and it's a minimum lot job for him. I mean, they just won't do it.
That's interesting. That's great. Great advice too. Jeff, what about you as a finisher? What kind of advice might you give partners who are thinking about accepting a job and you're their next step?
I would say know and realize, you know, realistic lead times for the finishing. Oftentimes we've seen that fabricate, not to point anything out, but some fabricators are allotted a certain amount of time for lead time, and perhaps they end up burning it up before it even gets to the finishing, which, you know, for that we do offer expedited services because we know that occasionally does happen. So being realistic about the lead time of finishing and allowing for that in your process up front could certainly help alleviate some of those pains.
All right. So if I could summarize, it would be know the capabilities of your shop. So know what you're capable of, and then know what's required of the next process, so you can be realistic about, am I capable of this runtime on this job? So going on to the next question, I would love to hear from Chris on this one. You are Mr. Problems guy. You're like, people turn to you when things go wrong in the materials world. So what are some current issues that you're seeing related to materials and finishing delays? Can you speak to those kind of those trends that you're seeing and maybe give a few tips or pieces of advice to them? And then I would love to also hear from the rest of the panel. Bobby, you as well. You'd be great for this one.
Thanks, Carrick. Right now, we're dealing with, just as everybody else is, supply chain issues. It varies between each vendor. Xometry Supplies is drop ship only. So we have plenty of relationships with plenty of vendors, and they all deal with different challenges. We'll have one who has a workforce issue. They don't have enough people in their shop. Machines go down. They're having issues with carriers, having issues getting certain metals in. I know red metals are a really big problem right now because electric cars becoming more of a thing. You know, red metals are just being distributed among way too many people with not enough supply.
while you're on that topic, I'll jump in there too. Is we are seeing even some of the more common materials, C101, C110, C360, those types of materials where, inventory stocks that are typically there, have been bought up, and that we're seeing some more extended lead times for those types of materials, just to even get some of the basics in. Seeing lead times that are potentially quoted out based on mill runs. And when you get pricing based on a mill run, that's still an approximate. What Chris mentioned on the workforce at both the mills that are producing the material and at the distributor level is, I've got one that tells me, hey, I have eight spots to fill my third shift up. And that's why you're seeing, plate processing time, which was traditionally on a custom cut piece of plate, 2 to 3 days from some of these people, ballooning up to 4 and 5, sort of at a minimum for products like stainless steel plate across grades, 304, 316, 17.4, 15.5, all of those that are in plate products, we're seeing where that processing time is ballooning up, and in some cases 7 to 10 business days even to do any type of custom cutting if it's required to go on a table. But bar stocks, we're seeing 2 to 3 days on any type of custom cutting that's having there. A trend with import material, foreign DFAR compliant material, we're seeing where those lead times are going up. Everybody hears about the issues with the ports and the trucking systems and getting material actually to the distributors. So foreign non-DFAR products from China or Russian origin, they're just struggling to get that inventory in domestically. Domestic plate and products, we're seeing where that is, still a pretty good inventory levels across the board. But yeah, I can talk all day about ports and where's the cheap plate. So we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Is like, are we spending a lot of time in the process of like even trying to source material? Are we spending so much time trying to find the cheapest price? Or are we focusing on, the true thing, which is the processing time, especially with timeliness? Are we beating vendors up over $5 a pop, or are we, spending more time just seeing who can get you the material in the time frame that it requires to get jobs done?
Yeah,
as far as like, sorry, go ahead.
Really, really interesting stuff. It's funny, supply chain issues has become like its own buzzword nowadays. And so having the foresight to understand that supply chain issues are a thing, part of my planning needs to be to plan for supply chain issues. Great piece of advice right there. So
can I chime in here? We actually have a question in the chat that I think might fit really well here. Thomas asked, what strategies are there to react quickly? For example, maybe if you're a prototype shop in a supply limited environment without getting trapped with a lot of inventory. Does anyone have thoughts or comments on that?
Yes, that is a great question, Thomas.
Well, I'll start. Is like there are resources, material sourcing resources out there that carry standard sizes. Oftentimes we're being asked, especially with anything expedited, in order to save a machine shop time on their front end of their processes, to provide them with custom cuts. I think having the ability to source standard sizes of materials, even though you may be paying a premium for that because of its availability, and sourcing, with next day shipping, something like that they can pick it off their shelf and ship it to you next day. That's one way to think about it, is maybe potentially increasing internal processing capabilities to process a potentially larger piece of stock, in some cases potentially a much larger piece of stock, down to the appropriate size that you need. Being stuck with a lot of additional inventory, that is something that I guess is going to need to be determined. If you want to carry, we have a program where we have different sizes that are close to potential bounding boxes and working envelopes that you work with, and you might have five line items of a particular stock that you keep on hand rather than the entire catalog of flat bar stocks that you do. It might cost you a little bit of additional machine time and cost there, but build that into your price. I think that's, you're charging a premium for those expedited options, quick turn options. And so, you build that in where, you're going to carry a piece of stock, a limited number of pieces of stock, but in a dimension that is going to allow you to produce something maybe a little bit smaller and not carry 20 line items of flat bar dimension, rather carry 5 that are a little bit bigger, a little bit more spaced out, where you can produce a smaller part out of a slightly larger piece of material than may ultimately, ideally, be necessary.
Great stuff, Bobby, and a great question from Thomas. So moving on to the next question, we're talking a lot about.
Carrick, can I interrupt for a second?
Go ahead. Yeah, absolutely.
As far as tips go at the end of this, one tip that I do have is jobs get held up a lot in VQC because they don't have the proper paperwork, like documents, full traceability, material certs versus COCs. When you quote and get quoted for your materials, make sure that the language is agreeable. Make sure that you're asking for exactly what you need and that your quoter is giving you exactly what you need on that quote. It should say full traceability needed, COC, just anything that you need. And this also goes back to what Mark and Jeff were talking about. All the info is there. That's part of the info that you need to get that job through, because they can't ship until VQC is approved.
That's
excellent point, Chris.
Great,
Excellent.
Chris. So right now, if we were to move on to our next question, right now, the conversation has been pretty general. We're talking about how there can be problems. There can, but we haven't talked about any specific stories of when that's actually been the case. So I would love to hear, Amy, you talk to a lot of partners. I would love to hear a story from you of a time when shipping or supply chain was an issue from a partner and you had to talk to them, or a time where something, no fault of their own, came up, a machine broke down and they had to pivot and problem solve on the spot. I would love to hear, I'm a sucker for a good story. So we'll start with Amy, but I would love to hear any story of when production did not go as planned. What did you do? How did you handle it? How did it impact your on-time delivery, or did it because you pivoted well? So we'll start with Amy, and then we'll go from there.
Rather than specific, because I have these conversations all the time. So rather than a specific story, the conversation that I tend to have with partners struggling with OTS, and this also comes from being a production planner in my previous life, mitigation. What is your mitigation should something go wrong? And Thomas's question regarding stock kind of alluded to that as well. If somebody calls in sick, if there's inclement weather, if your machine breaks down, what is plan B? Do you have a plan B? And having that kind of planning ahead of time is crucial. And really, if you know that I'm running this job on machine A and machine A goes down, but you're also aware if something happens to machine A, I can move it to machine B. So mitigation to me is so important. Being able to know where you can break in, where you can move something out, where you can move something forward. However, that being said, I also realize with a lot of our shops, they are small. It's one person, it's two people, it's three people. Mitigation becomes much more difficult. So, that becomes a little bit of an obstacle in itself. But, things like keeping stock, having a backup plan for employees out, having a backup plan for machine downtime, to me, those type of mitigation plans are critical to get to on-time shipping.
That's a great point, Amy. And with that in mind, Mark, Jeff, I would love to hear from you all. So Mark and I were talking before this call, and you're in Chicago. Snow's coming. You know, you're no stranger to external factors maybe affecting a job. I'm sure not every job has gone as planned. Do you have a story that you can tell where no fault of your own, life happened, things happened, where you had to problem solve on the spot? What did you do?
Knock on wood, nothing that I was working on for Xometry.
Hey,
lucky for me, I've got multiple machines in shop, and lucky for me, all those machines are pretty much interchangeable, so I can move it from one machine to another if I need to. But I don't have set working hours. I mean, if I need to be in a shop on Friday night, I am there on Friday night. If I got to work over the weekend, I will work over the weekend. And my goal was actually seeing the opportunities that I saw with Xometry. I think I was talking to some people in the past that I was planning on having one open machine in the shop. So I bought one machine, I think last January, and I figured, okay, good, I'm gonna have the machine on the side. If I need to jump in with something quick, I'll jump in, no problem. Well, that machine filled out pretty quick. And well, back to long hours again. Yeah. So oftentimes, so I don't interrupt the regular production. So I don't interrupt the schedule that I have on the floor for production. Sometimes I just have to be there at night and Saturday and get things done. But you know, like I said, lucky for me, everything is running smooth so far. But you have to be prepared for those instances, and you know, you just have to be willing to put in hours if you have to.
What about you, Jeff? Great, yeah, great insight, Mark. Jeff, do you have any stories of where, despite your best effort, things did not go according to plan? What did you do?
Well, none specifically, but you know, we are a very labor intensive, reliable service. So, you know, having people here is been our struggle. We didn't really get to answer on that last question, but that's been the tough part for us. So we do things like a lot of cross training, and we have multiple lines, some automatic, some manual. So for that mitigation factor, we have multiple paths that a certain product or a certain process can take when it gets here. And we also try to leave a little bit of capacity for those expedites when things do go wrong and they need to kind of hopscotch some other things. So yeah, just having some capacity. We have multiple shifts here as well. So if something absolutely needed to go out the next day, you know, it just gets put on the next shift. We run a lot of labor over here, a lot of time. So you know, there's always that ability that we can have some capacity for mistakes, you know.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff. And I'm going to ask a question for my own ignorance, just because I'm curious and I want to know. Can you give us an example of cross training? What do you mean by that? And what's an example of being cross trained at something, just so that people in the crowd might lines might be connected between two dots that they had not previously done.
Sure. I mean, we offer lots of finishes, right? Anodized, chromate, nickel. Those are all kind of different when it comes to processing. So having operators that can perform both types of techniques is great if we need to pull some people and throw them on a specific technology or a process, so we can add a little bit more labor there. Same thing with inspection. You know, each finish has its own set of testing and inspection requirements. So having more people know more of the inspections that are required helps us able to kind of hopscotch people around too where we need it, and bulk up the capacity in certain departments.
Good to know for my own sake, and hopefully also for somebody else who decided to tune in. If we want to move on to our next question, I think a lot of this we've already maybe discussed parts of this question already, but I would love for us to maybe boil down all those things and restate them right here. What are some lessons that you've learned over the years about on-time delivery? What are some lessons, some tips, some tricks that you've learned that are, if I'm going to take this job, I cannot go without? Boil down things that may have been stated earlier and go ahead and restate them right here. We can
Always
start.
assume the worst.
Yes, I was going to say we can start with Chris, but we'll start. There you go. Always assume the worst.
Always assume the worst is going to happen. Need, like Amy was saying, contingency plans are key. Plan A, plan B, and plan C, especially if you're dealing with expedited jobs, because you're already, I mean, you're starting from behind anyway. So just making sure that you have all of your plans aligned in case one fails, you move on to the next and getting that ball rolling as quickly as possible.
And that way you avoid that snowball effect. That's a killer. The snowball effect will take you down every time, and it's very hard to recover from.
That is a great point. Mark, I would love it if you were to restate what you were saying, and then maybe even speak a little bit more on. You said, I start planning before I accept the job. That was, I mean, that's a nugget that we could post on a poster somewhere.
Planning. Yeah.
Yes, go ahead and speak a little bit more on that. I just thought that was a great little piece of advice. Like, what do you do in your planning beforehand, and then what do you do in your planning throughout?
Well, first of all, you have to know and understand your strengths and weaknesses. Just be aware of the materials that you can get quickly and what kind of materials. Be aware of the tooling that you can get quickly that you may need. What do you have in a shop? Obviously, when it comes to your capabilities as far as programming or running machines, I mean, I think that goes without saying, but you have to be aware of those. And you know, it's all in the planning, and sometimes you just have to put in the hours. You just have to work.
And then Jeff, do you have anything that you would like to restate from earlier, boil down, just a little tip, little trick that you have over your many years as an OG finisher?
Well, it's just like Mark said, it's all about the planning. It is all about trying to gather all the correct information up front so you're not guessing when the pressure is on. For instance, having the correct specs on your PO, we'd almost prefer sometimes, if you don't know, don't even put it on your PO, because then now you're introducing a scenario where you could be creating conflict, and that's gonna have us pushing back on you to get answers. And we know that the more layers of communication you have to go through, the longer things take, right?
Yes.
So if you're unsure, you know, rely on your finisher to know their specs well, because we're the experts in metal finishing, right? We know every single spec that we offer. So try not to guess at it. Make sure you're either clearing it up front, or you're simply stating process per the print.
That is a great point. So moving on to the next question, I think that a lot of what we're hearing as far as the tips and the tricks go is planning. And so Dave Lieberman, the great Dave Lieberman of Xometry, hopefully you all have interacted with him. He's great. He always says that in the onboarding calls that he and I both do with our new partners is Xometry is a meritocracy. So the better the quality of your work, the more you're going to succeed at Xometry. But there's also this added element that we're talking about right now, where even if you produce the best quality work, but you're not able to be reliable because you're not able to plan accordingly, that is going to reflect your relationships. And so it's not just the best work, it's the best work on time, over time. And that is going to kind of be what makes you successful at Xometry, at least. Can you all kind of speak to that in the broader sense of the manufacturing world, not just in the Xometry world?
Eric, may I just jump in here for 1 second? This
Do.
plays in really well with a question that just came across the chat. We have Dawn asking, what methods do you use to manage multiple projects? So this is playing right into this question. What are some practices that have helped you simplify multiple complex projects?
So yeah, Mark, let's start with you. Let's say you got you're juggling multiple plates, and you got to keep them all going. You got to get them all across the finish line by their respective dates. What's some stuff you do to kind of prepare for that?
Being a small shop that we are, I mean, I don't have the fancy MRP software that will help me with, with all planning and the purchasing and all that stuff. So a lot of it is actually on my head. I do spend quite a bit of time in the planning, but it's all kind of divided. I'm dividing my time during the day for certain tasks like material purchases, like answering the emails, like reviewing jobs or doing inspections and things like that, because I do a lot of things actually in my shop, probably most than anybody else. So that's, I mean, like I said before, being a small guy, being a small shop, you have to wear multiple hats, and you have to be willing to put in the hours. There's just no way around it.
And Jeff, what about you?
We make a to-do list of 25 things and then throw them away and focus on the top 3. That's our approach, right? There's a never-ending list of things to do, right? But you really have to dive down and figure out what is important to you and make sure you accomplish those goals.
Great piece of advice right there. Establishing priority.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
I do that in my daily life. I write down everything I need to do, and then I assign value to it. And it helps me get through the day as far as doing what's most important, not necessarily what's most urgent. My mom used to say that all the time. I don't know if it's a common statement, but I've tried to live by it, and it's done well by me so far. Let's get through this last question. So that we can open up the floor to Q&A if we need to. But so we've talked a lot about planning. You have to have a plan A, you have to have a plan B, and you have to have a plan C. What are some of your plan Bs and plan Cs as far as Mark, maybe you even spoke to this a little earlier with, I can switch it over. I have the ability to switch it over to another machine if I need to. I don't have set hours so that I can just work to get the job done. Do you have any more of those? And what kind of advice would you give to somebody who maybe didn't have the luxury of multiple people or multiple machines to work with?
Well, overcoming having a single machine is very difficult, and I know that. I can speak from experience because the very first machine that I bought, the only machine at the time, right when I got the first PO, the machine broke down. It just blew the servo drive. So I was behind right from the get-go. So I really know the pain. I mean, having multiple machines, I think that speaks for its own. The only thing is that, like I said, I mean, sometimes you just have to put yourself in an uncomfortable position with long hours of working over the weekends, but having the extra tooling on a shelf. I never buy one single tool. Always buy whether it's standard tooling, I buy it in lots, or if it's something even special, I will buy two if I know that I can return it. I have a lot of suppliers in the area, but with McMaster and MSC, you can get the tooling pretty much the next day from these guys. I don't know what else I can say to contribute to planning to give you any advice.
You don't have to beat a dead horse. You've spoken plenty on it.
Yeah.
And, if anyone wants to add to that, please feel free to. But one of the things that you mentioned is sometimes you have to work long hours because you accepted the job and you care to get it across the finish line by the necessary date. Maybe the most important thing to boil that down to would be know your shop's capabilities and know the kind of work that you're willing to do. And if it's going to stretch you thin and you don't like having to work late hours, then know what you're capable of so that you don't accept a job that's going to put you in a situation where you might have to be working late on a Friday night. Is there anything else to add as far as mitigation plans go? I mean, I know it can be very complicated, especially if you are one machine, one person shop. No? Well, I mean, I'm not going to beat a dead horse, but if there's any questions that have come up in the chat that didn't get asked, Casey, please, we can use this time for that. And if you have any questions that you didn't put in the chat but you'd like to ask now, go ahead and ask them now in the chat, and Casey can take it over.
Yeah, so we had a question from Mike Hirsch in the chat. He was struggling with some illness, needed surgery, and was really working some overtime to recover the lead time on a job. One of his question was, because I'm unwilling to fail or lose my dream, at what point is a day or two being late more acceptable than the sacrifice made? So I think kind of just thinking about, where is the line? When do you kind of just bite the bullet and you're like, this isn't going to be on time?
Well, I guess you really have to ask that question yourself, whoever is asking it. I mean, how far are you willing to go? I mean, I haven't been in a position where my health was at risk or my well-being. And, you know, if I need to work 14 or 16 hours a day, that's my choice. And we all have to make those decisions for ourselves. Where do we want to be a year from today? Where do we want to be in the future? And that goes into planning. I mean, it's a long-term planning. I mean, if you want to work 20 hours a week, that's fine. You can work 20 hours a week. I mean, but sometimes you just have to. Sometimes you just have to put up the work.
So knowing what your not just knowing, this is a great question from the chat, not just knowing what your shop is capable of, but know what you're willing to do as well.
What you're capable of and what you're willing to do.
Yes. What
are your goals?
What are you willing to do? And then what's it going to require on that next step? All are factors that have to be considered before you press that accept button on a job. I
might touch this one too, Carrick, if that's okay. You know, it's reading Mike's comment there, you know, it sounds like there was, you know, a domestic material requirement, and you know, that was that information presented to you prior to accepting. You know, as several people have said during this discussion, is having all the information up front and knowing before you hit that accept button whether or not it's going to be attainable. You know, is if that information was made apparent to you before we were able to hit accept. You know, I think that's what we see on some occasions, you know, when sourcing certain types of materials is, you know, a particular requirement or a spec, something that's called out, you know, might make it more difficult to find in a particular stock type than what would be optimal. You know, just because it would be optimal for that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be available from a vendor in a time frame that works for you. So I think, you know, if the requirements that a customer presents you aren't complete, there should be a level of understanding. If you have a reasonable customer, that if all of the requirements and all of the information wasn't presented completely at time of acceptance, and that this only method of completion is going to require a deviation from the original plan, you know, that's something that you have to consider as well. It's like,
right.
is that customer worth the extra headache that's there?
Right.
You know,
and I hate to be the guy that has to do it, but I need to respect your all's time. This has been an excellent conversation. I'm so glad that we got to have it. I think it went very well, and that it can be very fruitful moving forward as far as knowing when to press accept on that job board and knowing how to plan accordingly moving forward. But thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. We're going to send out an email with a survey in it. Please, if you have any feedback for us, things that you would have liked to hear, topics you would like to hear discussed moving forward, put it all in there. We would love to hear from you. Again, we want to set you all up for success because we only win when you win. So please let us know any of that feedback. Other than that, thank you so much for joining us. And y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.